Welcome to this Baja 4 Sunday service. We are so grateful that you are with us. We represent Mountain Vista in the northwest side of Tucson, the UU Church of Tucson on the east side, Borderlands in Amado, and Sky Island in Sierra Vista. We come together each week because we know that we are stronger together than apart. Our theme this month and next month is about story. What stories are we telling ourselves and each other about this experience that we have had together? How can changing a story help us change how we feel about the present and the past? And what stories are we telling about our collective future? Today's Sunday service will reflect on what we do when the story we were living in is interrupted. Now, one piece of telling a new story is about naming truth, especially when we've inherited and repeated false stories. We are grappling together with the story of ongoing colonialism in this place that we call home. One small way that we grapple with that story each week is by telling the truth as part of a weekly land acknowledgement. We acknowledge each week that this land was stolen. The Chiricahua Apache and Pascoyaqui and O'odham and Opata peoples are the indigenous ancestors of this land and our neighbors today. We speak the truth of this ongoing colonization each week as being part of naming and learning a truer story. The stories we tell about the past, about people, and about land matter. And although this is one act, we practice it as one step towards being compelled and agitated and gathering ourselves up in collective acts of right relationship and decolonization. We gather each week to practice focusing on what really matters, to practice naming hard truths, to practice telling the story that is worth telling, and to practice knowing that we are not alone. Come, let's gather and practice together.
I'm here with Otis, and we are going to read these chalice lighting words from Reverend Laura Thompson. She writes, "Across the distance, the light from within us shines, sending love to you all. Across the distance, your light is fuel that warms us and helps to keep our own lights burning. Together, we keep the flame of community burning bright."
Two, how about we count in Mississippi? Let's try to slow this whole thing down. Ain't now the perfect time to slow it all down. Might be the last time we can slow this all down. The shops are boarded up and all is quiet in the city. Take another look around. Take it in and let it out. Just breathe in and breathe out. Just way down in another world, with maybe the nose of their mother and eyes of their father, they lie in wait, breathing underwater for now. One 1,000 lost a day. We're told that it's a pity. We try to slow this whole thing down, trying just enough to slow it all down. But that's not for us to worry about now. 'Cause way out in another world, streets full of mothers and aisles full of fathers, no more empty chairs. We're breathing underwater. There's a new light waiting to get out, and all we can do right now is count and count and count. And when we get to 10, we'll start all over again. Tiny lungs will heave, and we'll all breathe. All breathe as one. All breathe as one. All breathe as one.
Otis, I want to read a story to you and all the other people out there. It's a story called On the Day You Were Born by Deborah Fraser. And it is about the beginning of your life. And not just your life, but the life of a lot of other people out there. Because our lives, human lives, beings' lives, start in very similar ways. But where they go from there is very different, and that's what makes each of us unique. But we're going to read this story to remember that the beginnings of life is so very, very similar. On the Day You Were Born by Deborah Fraser. For Mother Earth, 4.5 billion years ago, and baby Kala, born June 1st, 1988, and you. On the eve of your birth, word of your coming passed from animal to animal. The reindeer told the Arctic terns, who told the humpback whales, who told the Pacific salmon, who told the monarch butterflies, who told the green turtles, who told the European eels, who told the busy garden warblers, and marvelous news migrated worldwide. While you waited in darkness, tiny knees curled to chin, the earth and her creatures and the sun and the moon all moved in their places, each ready to greet you, the very first moment of the very first day you arrived. On the day you were born, the round planet Earth turned towards your morning sky, whirling past darkness, spinning the night into light. On the day you were born, gravity's strong pull held you to the earth with a promise that you would never float away. While deep in space, the burning sun sent up towering flames, lighting your sky from dawn until dusk. On the day you were born, the quiet moon glowed and offered to bring a full, bright face each month to your windowsill. While high above the North Pole, Polaris, the glittering North Star, stood still, shining silver light into your night sky. On the day you were born, the moon pulled on the ocean below, and wave by wave, a rising tide washed the beaches clean for your footprints. While far out at sea, clouds swelled with water drops, sailed to shore on a wind, and rained you a welcome across the earth's green lands. On the day you were born, a forest of tall trees collected the sun's light in their leaves, where, in silent mystery, they made oxygen for you to breathe. While close to your skin and as high as the sky, air rushed in and blew about, invisibly protecting you and all living things on earth. On the day you were born, the earth turned, the moon pulled, the sun flared, and then, with a push, you slipped out of the dark quiet where suddenly you could hear a circle of people singing with voices familiar and clear. Welcome to the spinning world, the people sang as they washed your new tiny hands. Welcome to the green earth, the people sang as they wrapped your wet, slippery body. And as they held you close, they whispered in your open, curving ear, "We are so glad you've come."
Baja is an Israeli song from about 1970, with music by Nurit Hirsch and words by Ehud Manor. The original Hebrew verses talk of sitting on the porch and watching migrating birds fly as children play, and lush red grapes on evening plates, and the wind blows away the old newspapers with all the bad news on them. The chorus then invites you to come with me and see just how sweet everything will be when the new sun rises in the morning. I first learned this tune in a gorgeous, slow, and moody choral arrangement by David Levitt. In fact, today's prelude was based on some of those sounds from that arrangement. The original recording, though, has an almost folk bluegrass kind of groove to it. It's a very lovely and hopeful song about optimism in the face of a hard life. It gets sung a lot this time of year. When this gets released, we're about a week away from the new year on the Hebrew calendar, Rosh Hashanah. Almost exactly a year ago, Israeli singer and pop personality Shiri Memon released a new recording of it with this statement attached. The last year was not a good year, to say the least. We got to know words like quarantine, pandemic, and economic crisis. The rift in society has deepened, the discourse has become more violent than ever, and the fear of the unknown is gnawing at us all. But even in the midst of this bad situation, it is worth trying to seek the good. We are going through a lesson that will be remembered for generations. And what it takes to open the next Hebrew year properly is hope. Shaquille and I recorded this last year for Hanukkah using the English version that's in our hymnal, Soon the Day Will Arrive. In the spirit of Rosh Hashanah, I wish you L'Shana Tova. May the coming year be filled with hope, sweetness, and most of all, peace.
Soon the day will arrive when we will be together, and no longer will we live in fear. And the children will smile without wondering whether on that day dark new clouds will appear. Wait and see what a world
בשנה הבאה נשב על המרפסת ונספור ציפורים נודדות. וילדים בחופשה ישחקו תופסת בין הבית לבין השדות. עוד תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה. עוד תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה.
Some have dreamed, some have died to make a bright tomorrow, and our vision remains in our hearts. Now the torch must be passed with new hope, not in sorrow, and a promise to make a new start.
Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Oh, tire, kama tov yeh, bashana הבאה. Oh, tire, kama tov yeh, bashana הבאה.
I begin our sermon today with these words from the Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker. In 1976, I began a cross-country road trip on my way to seminary. I traveled with a friend. We had time, so we decided to take back roads. One afternoon, the road passed through rural western Pennsylvania, and late in the day, we came down through hill country into a valley. It had been raining hard, and as we neared a small town, we noticed blinking yellow lights warning of danger. We saw fields covered in standing water and passed several side roads blocked off with signs saying, "Road closed." "Looks like they've had a flood here," we said. Coming into town, we crossed a bridge over a wide river. The water was high and muddy and flowing fast. Sandbags lined the roadway. "Gosh," we said, "they must have had quite a bit of high water to contend with here. Looks like it was a major flood." We headed out of town, following a winding country road, captivated by the evidence all around us that there had been a dramatic flood. Then we rounded a bend, and in front of us, a sheet of water covered the roadway. The water was rising fast like a huge silver balloon being inflated before our eyes. We stopped and started to turn the car around. The water was rising behind us as well. Suddenly, we realized the flood hadn't happened yesterday or last week. It was happening here and now. Dry ground was disappearing fast. We hurriedly clambered out of the car and scrambled to higher ground. Soaked to the bone, we huddled under a fir tree. No longer were we lodged in our familiar vehicle. The cold water of the storm poured down on us, baptizing us both into the present, a present from which we had been insulated by both our car and our misjudgments about the country we were traveling through. I have found this story from Rebecca Parker a fitting example of what it is like to live in COVID. I remember watching the news about a virus in China, and I remember thinking that it was so far away. And I remember being on a treadmill at a gym, pregnant, watching a cruise ship with nowhere to go. And I remember a certain smug sense of not me-ness as I watched them. And I remember the gym getting quiet, and I remember when we got more groceries, and I remember curfews, and then I remember discerning with the board if we were going to close down. And I remember when the 4 ministers said, well, I guess we'll talk about resilience for 6 weeks. And then I remember when it became 3 months and 4 months and 6. And then I remember at 6 months, kind of waxing poetic with you all about how we were likely halfway through this. And wasn't it an interesting opportunity just to see if we could learn a little bit more from this quaint and painful time? And I remember folks feeling anxious then that we would have to stay apart for 6 months. And I remember our 1-year anniversary. And then I remember that what I thought in June would happen now isn't happening. So I've needed a story like this, Reverend Parker. I needed a parable, something that doesn't have a conclusion, something that I can see myself and our community in, because I have not been able to pull myself out of this experience far enough to see where we are headed. I recently told a pastoral care team that I feel like I'm in an ocean of COVID, and there are waves tumbling around us, and every so often I have a mason jar that I can shoot up from the water to catch a glimmer in the sunlight of what it is we're in just before the waves crash me down, and I am looking from within it, not from outside of it. Now, if I take Reverend Parker's story seriously, then I would have to admit to you that over the last 18 months, I kind of always assumed we'd get back into the car, that we would get that car into working order, and we would all pile in, hopefully all of us, and keep on going. That surely the weight of church history and church tradition is no match for COVID. Nothing derails a church year. But instead, what I think we find ourselves in is not just a flood. It's a flood plain. We are in a floodplain. Now, whether it is COVID or whether it's the next global illness, whether it's climate change, like colleagues and community members of ours who can't meet inside because of COVID, but can't meet outside because of fire season, and whether it's social unrest and uprising due to vast and increasing economic, racial, and social inequalities, we are in a floodplain. This is not some unprecedented event before we are lulled back into ease. There is something in what we are experiencing that is a new way of life. Now, living together soaked on a floodplain instead of driving our car on a highway will require a different set of spiritual and communal practices. It requires the kinds of spiritual practices that are best suited to a world of interruptions of your best plans and destructions of things we invested in, and great vulnerability for how it hurts, and profound interdependencies of how much we need each other. And whatever practices those are will have to be beyond the quaint during the painful, where we go beyond making bread because we need a new hobby while we're stuck in our homes, to breaking bread because we know there is no one else, there is nothing else that will rescue us. What we have is each other, and where we live is on the plains, and there are rivers that swell, and there are oceans that rise. So the implication of what I am saying is that, in my opinion, there is no getting back into the car. Now, I'm honestly not convinced that our beautiful car was the most admirable place for us to be in the first place. It was ultimately air-conditioned and insulated from the world. happily fossil fuel driven and extractive, and frankly, had limited seating. The radio was stuck to a couple of channels that those of us in the front seat had more power to choose, and that was what we listened to. Now, that hum of a vehicle in motion with what seems like a viable direction is very hard to stop. Even if we become uncertain about the direction, and even if we become uncertain about the methodology. And although it's not our most admirable impulse, it's our understandable impulse that we want to get the car turned back on and we want to take it out over this field of destruction. And of course, trust me, I want that on some level too. But the more I sit here, soaked to the bone, under this fir tree, surrounded by rocks and stones and the debris of all the things that people have lost. We are sitting in the debris of all the things that you and I and others have lost. And the more that we look at it, really look at it, the more I trust that the vehicle that got us this far is not viable on this new landscape. So what the hell is worth doing on a floodplain? Especially if you can't get back into the car. That is a great question. I don't know. This is a very frustrating sermon because I don't know. You can pause your YouTube here and talk amongst yourselves because I don't know how to finish this sermon. What is worth doing on a floodplain? Here's what I think I know. The hope in Reverend Dr. Parker's story is not in her and her friend getting rescued. It's in getting baptized. It's in the sacred interruption of being soaked into present life and to what is truly real. So within this metaphor of a floodplain, we could look to the wisdom of climate scientists and climate organizers, those kinds of people who have had their hands on the truth that the way we've always done it has to change, maybe for longer than any of us have. So when I look at creative actions and stories related to living in a floodplain or to rising sea levels, I've got two for you today, two side by side, one from Santa Barbara and one from Staten Island. Ironically, both of them are related to real estate, but we'll touch that metaphor later. In 2007, in Santa Barbara, there was a proposal by a local professor and NASA educator to place a light blue line through the downtown area that would show the potential sea rise of the city as a result of climate change. And that art installation would be there for 5 years. A temporary installation intended to inspire imagination and conversation about actions we could take to reduce the impact of us on the climate and reduce global warming. It would try to reveal daily potential losses. Just how many beaches or habitats or neighborhoods would be wiped out due to global inaction on climate change. Now, the city government initially supported it and approved it, providing public funding until, under scrutiny, getting private funding. But then the city went to war. Business owners and property owners on the seaside of the line were furious. This, they said, would damage their property values. Also, this was some alarmist, speculative, futuristic scenario. And with the fury of Santa Barbara beachfront property owners and business owners at their ankles, the city government and the professor withdrew the project. Now, the second story from Staten Island, 2012, 5 years after the Santa Barbara project, Hurricane Harvey has just inundated 400,000 New Yorkers, and people living on the eastern shore start talking about the loss. They start sharing about the loss. They go door to door sharing. They decide that they will collectively organize together to invite the state to purchase their flood-prone properties collectively at pre-flood prices. So 9 grassroots buyout groups are formed, and that working class community reimagines what it means to them to live in a floodplain. Instead of marginalization or being forced by their insurance companies to rebuild in the same location in a neglected area where they would be continually vulnerable and have their lives threatened, they begin to imagine something more. The next year, in 2013, the governor praises their efforts, arranges for funds to be made available to buy out the homes, with the plan that the homes would be knocked down, allowing wetlands to create the much needed storm buffer that the ecology would need to survive and adapt. Elizabeth Rush, who is the author of the book Rising, The Unsettling of the American Shore, reflects on this particular buyout in this way. These are her words. The superlatives used to describe Irma and Harvey and Sandy and Katrina before them are starting to sound eerily familiar. Unprecedented, record-breaking, game changer. But the game hasn't actually changed much. We continue to backfill and build on top of what could be buffering wetlands, and we continue to be shocked when those places flood. We continue to rely on flood insurance rate maps that use models generated from the past to predict present and future risk. But as polar ice caps melt and sea levels rise and storms intensify, the past is proving to be an increasingly unreliable guide. We have, she writes, the emotional resources to make the move, to walk away from the places that have long defined us, especially when those places are changing irrevocably. Now, in one story, a community desperately wants to stay in their car, their very, very nice car. They haven't even been flooded yet. They don't want to imagine they could be. It would lower the value of the current way of being. But in another one, a community is soaked into the present, and in so doing, turn to one another. They sit with the losses. They ask what is real. They generate the emotional resources to make a move, to walk away from what's long defined them, and they begin to articulate and then resource a different, more viable, more alive, more healthy, more secure way of being that takes seriously a changing world. So where are we at? I don't know. Remember, frustrating sermon. All I can tell you is what I know for me, and I'm curious what you know for you. What I know for me is that I'm soaked, and that I don't want to get back into the car. I won't drive it. I know that I want to gather with you at the base of this fir tree, and I want to sit with all of our losses. And amidst the pieces of debris that was our former lives, surrounded by our love and our loss, I want us to ask, what is real? I want to only talk about what really, really matters. And in that, I believe we can generate the emotional and imaginative resources to make the right next move. Because our hope is not in the rescue. Our hope is in the baptism. There will be better days. 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 Let the wave wash over the world. There will be better days. There will be better days. I am there will be better days. 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 Let the wave wash over the world. There will be better days. There will be better days. Let the wave wash over the world. There will be better days. There will be better days. Let the wave wash over the world. There will be better days. There will be better days. I am already there will be better days. There will be better days. Let the wave wash over the world. There will be better days. There will be better days. Let the wave wash over the world. There will be better days. There will be better days. Let the wave wash over the world. There will be better days. There will be better days. I am there will be better days. Let the wave wash over the world. There will be better days. 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 There will be better days.
Let the wave wash over me. Let the wave wash over me. Let the wave wash over me. Oh, let the wave wash over me.
There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. I extinguish our chalice this week with words from the Reverend Victoria Safford. The gates of hope. Our mission is to plant ourselves at the gates of hope, not the prudent gates of optimism, which are somewhat narrower, not the stalwart, boring gates of common sense, not the strident gates of self-righteousness, which creak and shrill on angry hinges. People cannot hear us there. They cannot pass through. nor the cheerful, flimsy garden gate of everything is going to be all right, but a different, sometimes lonely place, the place of truth-telling. About your own soul first of all and its condition, and the place of resistance and defiance, the piece of ground from which you see the world, both as it is and as it could be, as it will be. The place from which you glimpse not only struggle, but the joy of the struggle. And we stand there, beckoning and calling, telling people what we are seeing, asking people what they see. Amen.